success, be nobleness, and every gain divine. And you know, when I was in school, we used to sing it something like this. Listen here. Oh, beautiful, far spacious skies, far amber waves of grain.
Welcome to The Politicrat. I'm Omar Moore. It is Saturday, July the 4th, 2020. That was Ray Charles with America the Beautiful. On this episode of The Politicrat, the voices of America. James Baldwin, Samuel L. Jackson, excerpts from the documentary by Raoul Peck from 2016 entitled I Am Not Your Negro. Plus, Toni Morrison and Caroline Randall Williams. Next. I Too by Langston Hughes. I too sing America. I am the darker brother. They send me to eat in the kitchen when company comes. But I laugh and eat well and grow strong. Tomorrow I'll be at the table when company comes. Nobody'll dare say to me, eat in the kitchen then. Besides, they'll see how beautiful I am and be ashamed. I too am America.
Heroes, as far as I could see, were white, and not merely because of the movies, but because of the land in which I lived, of which movies were simply a reflection. I despised and feared those heroes because they did take vengeance into their own hands. They thought vengeance was theirs to take. And yes, I understood that. My countrymen were my enemy. I suspect that all these stories are designed to reassure us that no crime was committed. We'd made a legend out of a massacre.
Leaving aside all the physical facts which one can quote, leaving aside rape or murder, leaving aside the bloody catalog of oppression, which we are in one way too familiar with already, what this does to the subjugated is to destroy his sense of reality. This means, in the case of an American Negro, born in that glittering republic, and in the moment you are born, since you don't know any better, every stick and stone and every face is white, and since you have not yet seen a mirror, you suppose that you are too. It comes as a great shock, around the age of 5 or 6 or 7, to discover that Gary Cooper killing off the Indians when you were rooting for Gary Cooper, that the Indians were you. It comes as a great shock to discover that the country, which is your birthplace, and to which you owe your life and your identity, has not in its whole system of reality evolved any place for you.
Have you ever been an outsider? For 1 day, 1 year, 10 years, 244 years, 500 years? Outsiders. That's what James Baldwin was talking about when he was growing up, and how he was made to feel by the larger white society in which he grew up in as a young kid, as a young boy. Here in this next clip from the Raoul Peck documentary from 2016 entitled I Am Not Your Negro is a clip about moral monsters, white people in America being moral monsters based upon what we've seen over the last 200, 300, 400 years.
And there are days, this is one of them, when you wonder what your role is in this country and what your future is in it. How precisely you're going to reconcile yourself to your situation here, and how you're going to communicate to the vast, heedless, unthinking, cruel white majority that you are here. I'm terrified at the moral apathy, the death of the heart, which is happening in my country. These people have deluded themselves for so long that they really don't think I'm human. I base this on their conduct, not on what they say. And this means that they have become, in themselves, moral monsters. Most of the white Americans I've ever encountered, really, had a Negro friend or a Negro maid or somebody in high school, but they never, or rarely, after school was over or whatever, came to my kitchen. We were segregated from the schoolhouse door. Therefore, he doesn't know. He really does not know what it was like for me to leave my house, leave the school and go back to Harlem. He doesn't know how Negroes live. And it comes as a great surprise to the Kennedy brothers and to everybody else in the country. I'm certain, again, that like most white Americans I have, encountered, they have I'm sure they have nothing whatever against Negroes. That's really not the question. The question is really a kind of apathy and ignorance, which is a price to be paid for segregation. That's what segregation means. You don't know what's happening on the other side of the world because you don't want to know.
There really is something to be said about wanting to know or not wanting to know. And segregation is not segregation from white people. It's segregation from the resources that allow white people to live a more comfortable life. Segregation from that for black people, so that black people weren't given access to the things that white people took for granted and had access to all the time. Like good schools, like quality educations, like banks, like loans that were given to white people all the time, like all kinds of things, health care. That's what segregation was about. It wasn't about integrating with white people. It was about being given access to the resources that would improve a black person's life. That is what this was about. Segregation in the 1970s in Boston and all over the country, where busing happened, and there was this fierce white resistance to it, a racist resistance to it. We don't want your kind here in Boston going to our schools. These schools offer everybody. But of course the system made it clear that the schools were really for white students only. That's what segregation is. That's what segregation is. And that's what James Baldwin was talking about. It is Eisenhower in the 1950s enforcing the law by sending the National Guard in to do just that, to enforce the law, the federal law, that allowed for desegregation of these schools, these white schools. You had the Brown versus Board of Education decision in 1954. That was during the time that Eisenhower was president of this country. And he sent in the National Guard to enforce all of these orders, the Supreme Court's order, this federal law, that meant that black people could go to schools that had been predominantly white to get their education. That's what that was about. This next clip from I Am Not Your Negro, which is a must-see documentary. You must watch that documentary. And these clips are just a few clips. I've not obviously put everything into this edition of this podcast, but you really must see that film. It is a documentary. It's called I Am Not Your Negro. It was nominated for an Academy Award in 2017. Should have won, quite frankly. And I think had it been released today, it would win. This is Samuel L. Jackson in the voice of James Baldwin, recalling from Baldwin's manuscript of 30 pages, Remember This House, which is where much of this documentary by Raoul Peck is based. A manuscript that, unfortunately, James Baldwin never got to finish. Remember This House. This is an account of what happened when Lorraine Hansberry, the excellent poet and playwright and author, award-winning author, what happened when she was in conversation with the Attorney General at the time, RFK, Robert F. Kennedy, and she mentions the photo of a cop, a white cop, with his knee on a black woman's neck in Alabama, Birmingham, in the 1960s. Here we are in 2020 with George Floyd. Not much has changed in that regard. Has it?
We would like, said Lorraine, from you a moral commitment. He looked insulted, seemed to feel that he'd been wasting his time. Well, Lorraine sat still, watching all the while. She looked at Bobby Kennedy, who perhaps for the first time looked at her. But I'm very worried, she said, about the state of the civilization which produced that photograph of the white cop standing on that Negro woman's neck in Birmingham.
One of the most terrible things is that, in fact, whether I like it or not, I am an American. My school really was the streets of New York City. My frame of reference was George Washington and John Wayne. But I was a child. When a child opens his eyes in the world, he has to use what he sees. There's nothing else to use. And you are formed by what you see, the choices you have to make, and the way you discover what it means to be black in New York. And then throughout the entire country. I know how you watch as you grow older. This is not a figure of speech. The corpses of your brothers and your sisters pile up around you. And not for anything they have done. They were too young to have done anything. But what one does realize is that when you try to stand up and look the world in the face like you had a right to be here, you have attacked the entire power structure of the Western world. Forget the Negro problem. Don't write any voting acts. We had that, it's called the 15th Amendment. During the Civil Rights Bill of 1964, what you have to look at is what is happening in this country. And what is really happening is that brother has murdered brother knowing it was his brother. White men have lynched Negroes knowing them to be their sons. White women have had Negroes burned knowing them to be their lovers. It is not a racial problem. It's a problem whether or not you're willing to look at your life and be responsible for it and then begin to change it. That great Western house I come from is one house, and I am one of the children of that house. Simply, I'm the most despised child of that house. And it is because the American people are unable to face the fact that, in fact, I am flesh of their flesh, bone of their bone, created by them. My blood, my father's blood is in that soil.
We are an integral part of the United States. We are an integral part of America. Black people built this country. And this is the country that you stole from the Native Americans. That land was stolen from them violently, and they were genocided. And then you brought us over here in chains against our will from our continent, our countries, on the continent of Africa. And you, under violence, threat, and hatred, enslaved us. And we built this country for free of charge. We've never been paid for our hundreds of years of labor. And now you don't want us here. In fact, you've not wanted us here for a very long time. So why did you forcibly bring us here in the first place?
I've always been struck in America by an emotional poverty so bottomless and a terror of human life, of human touch, so deep that virtually no American appears able to achieve any viable organic connection between his public stance and his private life. This failure of the private life has always had the most devastating effect on American public conduct and on black-white relations. If Americans were not so terrified of their private selves, they would never have become so dependent on what they call the Negro problem.
If America is such a great country, then why are we so afraid? Why are so many of us so fearful? Why? What are we afraid of? Are we afraid of the truth? Are we afraid of ourselves? Are we afraid of each other? Is it that we can't ever get in touch with the reality that maybe we aren't doing as well as we think we're doing as people, as a nation, in our own lives? What is it that we are afraid of? We claim that we are open and tolerant, and I hate that word tolerant, by the way. That we are people who love and we care and we don't mind when people of different races get together and get married and have kids, or our spouses or partners. We claim all of that. But I think it's a lie. We know what the truth is. I think this next clip tells you all you need to know. It's straight from James Baldwin's own life as a young man.
I knew a blonde girl in the village a long time ago. And eventually we never walked out of the house together. She was far safer walking the streets alone than when walking with me. A brutal and humiliating fact which thoroughly destroyed whatever relationship this girl and I might have been able to achieve. This happens all the time in America. But Americans have yet to realize what a sinister fact this is and what it says about them. When we walked out in the evening then, she would leave ahead of me, alone. I would give about 5 minutes, and then I would walk out alone, taking another route and meet her on the subway platform. We would not acknowledge each other. We would get into the subway car, sitting at opposite ends of it, and walk separately through the streets of the free and the brave to wherever we were going, a friend's house or the movies.
Here is Harry Belafonte now talking about the March on Washington. Well, I mean, they had been at the March on Washington. This is August 1963, August the 28th, 1963. And there were a number of people. It's called the Hollywood Forum. And there were a number of people from Hollywood who had come to D.C. to join Dr. King and many activists for this March on Washington, which was really a march for jobs. That's what it really was. And of course, the famous speech dubbed the I Have a Dream speech by the media, quite frankly. That was not really what the title of the speech was. I guess it became that because the media took that one line out of it. But in that very same speech, Dr. King was speaking about bold change for black people, for justice for black people, for jobs for black people. He was talking about these things and more. And about the wariness of corporations and being wary of them. And all kinds of things he was talking about. Calling for boycotts and things. And that's never really been given air, of course, by the corporate news media. But Dr. King said many things that day. And so on the backdrop of that, there were numerous Hollywood individuals who came in, all men, at least in this round table that I'm about to play a clip from. Marlon Brando, Sidney Poitier, Charlton Heston, Joseph Mankiewicz, the director, and a number of other people, and certainly Harry Belafonte, whom you are going to hear from right now. And he directly challenges in this clip, directly challenges white people in America. And this is 1963, almost 60 years ago.
To Washington, there's 7 out of some 200,000 American citizens who came to the Capitol to march for freedom and for jobs. Will this tremendous outburst now lead to a course of action, Mr. Belafonte?
The now that is being spoken about is the fact that in 100 years, finally, through whatever the causes have been in history, and most of them have been because of oppression, the Negro people have strongly and fully taken the bit in their teeth. They're asking absolutely no quarter from anyone. But I do say that the bulk of the interpretation of whether this thing is going to end successfully and joyously or is going to end disastrously lays very heavily with the white community. It lays very heavily with the profiteers. It lays very heavily with the vested interests. It lays very heavily with a great middle stream in this country of people who have refused to commit themselves or even have the slightest knowledge that these things have been going on.
Do you think America is a fantasy land? Or is it a dangerous fantasy mixed with a brutal reality? What do you think America is? If you had to define America in one sentence or even in one word, how would you define it? Do you think you can? Here is Samuel L. Jackson. Again, reading the words of James Baldwin here. Talking about America. But first, a voice that you will recognize instantly.
We've dropped too many bombs on Vietnam now. Let us save our national honor, stop the bombing, and stop the war.
What I'm trying to say to this country, to us, is that we must know this. We must realize this. That no other country in the world have been so fat and so sleek and so safe and so happy and so irresponsible and so dead. No other country can afford to dream of a Plymouth and a wife and a house with a fence and the children growing up safely to go to college and to become executives and then to marry and have the Plymouth and the house and so forth. A great many people do not live this way and cannot imagine it and do not know that when we talk about democracy, this is what we mean. The industry is compelled, given the way it is built, to present to the American people a self-perpetuating fantasy of American life. Their concept of entertainment is difficult to distinguish from the use of narcotics.
What worries you about them having black partners? Do you think people are going to look down on them or judge
Yes,
them?
I think people look down.
Yeah.
To watch the TV screen for any length of time is to learn some really frightening things about the American sense of reality. We are cruelly trapped between what we would like to be and what we actually are. And we cannot possibly become what we would like to be until we are willing to ask ourselves just why the lives we lead on this continent are mainly so empty, so tame, and so ugly. These images are designed not to trouble, but to reassure. They also weaken our ability to deal with the world as it is, ourselves as we are.
TV is called programming, and there's a certain reason why that's the case. We have been, I think, to a great degree over the last 60 to 70 years programmed. And most of it for the worse, not for the better. And now we're being programmed again, I would say, with our iPhones and the technology that's come up. And we are literally taking leave of our senses. With all of this technology that we've got now, we don't even know what to do with ourselves anymore. It's as if some of us, or many of us, are simply fed up with wanting to lift a finger, to even sacrifice anything, to even do anything, because our lives are so fully automated. We can't, some of us, make the barest sacrifice. We can't even wear a mask. That is how ridiculous and lazy we have become in this country, some of us. We would much rather turn a blind eye and a deaf ear to hundreds of thousands of people who have already died of coronavirus in this country, and the millions of people, surely, who have died all over the planet. We just don't know what the real numbers are. We've gotten that lazy in the United States, and that's a very dangerous place to be. I think that some of these clips are speaking to that, particularly the ones where you hear Samuel L. Jackson reading the words of James Baldwin. And James Baldwin himself, in this next clip, makes it clear it's not what we're feeling, but it is what we are seeing and what is being done to us that is the truth of America. This is from the 1960s on the Dick Cavett Show.
The years I lived in Paris did one thing for me. They released me from that particular social terror, which was not the paranoia of my own mind, but a real social danger visible in the face of every cop, every boss, everybody. I don't know what most white people in this country feel, but I can only include what they feel from the state of their institutions. I don't know if white Christians hate Negroes or not, but I know that we have a Christian church which is white and a Christian church which is black. I know, as Malcolm X once put it, that the most segregated hour in American life is high noon on Sunday. That says a great deal for me about a Christian nation. It means that I can't afford to trust most white Christians and certainly cannot trust the Christian church. I don't know whether the labor unions and their bosses really hate me. That doesn't matter, but I know I'm not in their unions. I don't know if the real estate lobby is anything against black people, but I know the real estate lobbies keep me in the ghetto. I don't know if the Board of Education hates black people, but I know the textbooks they give my children to read and the schools that we have to go to. Now, this is the evidence. You want me to make an act of faith, risking myself, my wife, my woman, my sister, my children, on some idealism which you assure me exists in America, which I have never seen.
Next, Toni Morrison. In 1993, Charlie Rose, of all people, interviewed Toni Morrison on his show on PBS. Here are just a few moments or minutes of what Toni Morrison had to say.
Which brings me to my question to you. Do you still have that encounter? Do you, Toni Morrison, Pulitzer Prize winner, successful, honored in the halls of academe, etc., still have that encounter?
Yes, I do, Charlie, but let me tell you, that's the wrong question.
Okay, what's the right question?
How do you feel? Not you, Charlie Rose,
right.
But don't you understand that the people who do this thing, who practice racism,
right,
are bereft? There is something distorted about the psyche. It's a huge waste, and it's a corruption and a distortion. It's a profound neurosis that nobody examines for what it is. It feels crazy. It is crazy. And it has just as much of a deleterious effect on white people and possibly equal as it does black people. I always knew that I had the moral high ground all my life. I always thought those people who said I couldn't come in the drugstore and I had to sit in these funny places, I couldn't go in the park.
Superior to them
I
from
did.
Day one.
And I thought they knew that I knew that they were inferior to me morally. I always thought that. And my parents always thought that. But if the racist white person, I don't mean the person who is examining his consciousness and so on, doesn't understand that he or she is also a race, it's also constructed, it's also made, and it also has some kind of serviceability. But when you take it away, I take your race away. And there you are, all strung out. And all you got is your little self. And what is that? What are you without racism? Are you any good? Are you still strong? You still smart? You still like yourself? I mean, these are the questions. Part of it is, yes, the victim, how terrible it has been for black people.
But you don't like that.
I'm not a victim. I refuse to be one.
And the victim is the other person who is morally inferior. And
that's a serious question.
On to
of course.
Racism
if you have to hold
for his or her own self-esteem and definition.
If you can only be tall because somebody's on their knees, then you have a serious problem. And my feeling is white people have a very, very serious problem. And they should start thinking about what they can do about it. Take me out of it.
Then give white people some free advice.
They're all in my books.
And the advice is to come to grips,
of course,
with your own fears.
Absolutely.
Your own
Look at
fears.
It. Absolutely. Your own fears, your own history, and what you need. What do you need this for? You know, it's not, I said glibly a moment ago, and it feels good. It must feel good, otherwise they'd give it up. It's wasteful.
Right.
It costs a lot. It's ugly. It hurts. What are you paying for that for?
Driven by fear.
That's right.
Yeah. Give me your take on Rodney King and Los Angeles and all of that experience.
And the most remarkable thing to me about Rodney King and what happened afterwards was people kept saying, oh, this terrible explosion, oh, the riots, oh, this is awful and could have been avoided, or what is it about? What struck me most about the people who were burning down shops and stealing was how long they waited. The restraint, not the spontaneity, the restraint. You realize the moment to be anarchic was when we saw those tapes. When we first saw those tapes.
They waited for justice.
They waited. How long was that? 9 months? A year? They waited for justice almost a year and didn't come. No one talks about the fact that no one ran out into the streets as I wanted to. I was sitting in there with my son. It was like a ballet. It was unbelievable. And I think everybody felt that way. And they didn't do a thing. They waited. That's amazing. That's amazing to me.
Caroline Randall Williams is the author of Lucy Negro Redux and the author of Soul, Food, Love. She is a writer in residence at Vanderbilt University. She can be found on Twitter at CarolanWill. Caroline Randall Williams had a writing of hers published in the New York Times on June the 26th, 2020. It is entitled, "You Want a Confederate Monument? My Body is a Confederate Monument." The subtitle, "The black people I come from were owned and raped by the white people I come from. Who dares to tell me to celebrate them?" I am now going to read this piece that she wrote. It is labeled an opinion piece, but it's clearly factual, and it is her story, not really an opinion at all. For this I'm about to read is the history of the United States of America. Dateline, Nashville. I have rape-colored skin. My light brown blackness is a living testament to the rules, the practices, the causes of the Old South. If there are those who want to remember the legacy of the Confederacy, if they want monuments, well then, my body is a monument. My skin is a monument. Dead Confederates are honored all over this country with cartoonish private statues, solemn public monuments, and even in the names of United States Army bases. It fortifies and heartens me to witness the protests against this practice and the growing clamor from serious, non-partisan public servants to redress it. But there are still those, like President Trump and the Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, who cannot understand the difference between rewriting and reframing the past. I say it is not a matter of airbrushing history, but of adding a new perspective. I am a black Southern woman, and of my immediate white male ancestors, all of them were rapists. My very existence is a relic of slavery and Jim Crow. According to the rule of hypodescent, the social and legal practice of assigning a genetically mixed race person to the race with less social power, I am the daughter of 2 black people, the granddaughter of 4 black people, the great-granddaughter of 8 black people. Go back one more generation, and it gets less straightforward and more sinister. As far as family history has always told, and as modern DNA testing has allowed me to confirm, I am the descendant of black women who were domestic servants and white men who raped their help. It is an extraordinary truth of my life that I am biologically more than half white, and yet I have no white people in my genealogy in living memory. No voluntary whiteness. I am more than half white, and none of it was consensual. White Southern men, my ancestors, took what they wanted from women they did not love, over whom they had extraordinary power, and then failed to claim their children. What is a monument but a standing memory? An artifact to make tangible the truth of the past. My body and blood are a tangible truth of the South and its past. The black people I come from were owned by the white people I come from. The white people I come from fought and died for their lost cause. And I ask you now, who dares to tell me to celebrate them? Who dares to ask me to accept their mounted pedestals? You cannot dismiss me as someone who doesn't understand. You cannot say it wasn't my family members who fought and died. My blackness does not put me on the other side of anything. It puts me squarely at the heart of the debate. I don't just come from the South. I come from Confederates. I've got rebel gray-blue blood coursing my veins. My great-grandfather Will was raised with the knowledge that Edmund Pettus was his father. Pettus, the storied Confederate general, the Grand Dragon of the Ku Klux Klan, the man for whom Selma's Bloody Sunday Bridge is named. So I am not an outsider who makes these demands. I am a great-great-granddaughter. And here I'm called to say that there is much about the South that is precious to me. I do my best teaching and writing here. There is, however, a peculiar model of Southern pride that must now, at long last, be reckoned with. This is not an ignorant pride, but a defiant one. It is a pride that says our history is rich, our causes are justified, our ancestors lie beyond reproach. It is a pining for greatness, if you will. A wish again for a certain kind of American memory. A monument-worthy memory. But here's the thing. Our ancestors don't deserve your unconditional pride. Yes, I am proud of every one of my black ancestors who survived slavery. They earned that pride by any decent person's reckoning. But I am not proud of the white ancestors whom I know by virtue of my very existence to be bad actors. Among the apologists for the Southern cause and for its monuments, there are those who dismiss the hardships of the past. They imagine a world of benevolent masters and speak with misty eyes of gentility and honor and the land. They deny plantation rape or explain it away or question the degree of frequency with which it occurred. To those people, it is my privilege to say, I am proof. I am proof that whatever else the South might have been, or might believe itself to be, it was and is a space whose prosperity and sense of romance and nostalgia were built upon the grievous exploitation of black life. The dream version of the Old South never existed. Any manufactured moment to that time in that place tells half a truth at best. The ideas and the ideals it purports to honor are not real. To those who have embraced these delusions, now is the time to re-examine your position. Either you have been blind to a truth that my body's story forces you to see, or you really do mean to honor the oppressors at the expense of the oppressed, and you must at last acknowledge your emotional investment in a legacy of hate. Either way, I say the monuments of stone and metal, the monuments of cloth and wood, all the man-made monuments must come down. I defy any sentimental Southerner to defend our ancestors to me. I am quite literally made of the reasons to strip them of their laurels. Caroline Randall Williams. On this July 4th, we still have so many more mountains to move. White Americans must move them and play a very active role in doing so. There are still many white people in the United States of America who need to get involved. Still, an overwhelming majority of white people in America who must get up and join the white people that they have seen stand up, that they have seen awaken, that they have seen demand justice for black lives. That is the challenge for white people in America now. For that 75% of white people in America to join the other 25% of white people who are already doing the kinds of things that they need to do and continue to do to use their whiteness in a positive way and to be anti-racists. There are still, in my view, 75% of white people in America who have yet to do that. It is July the 4th, 2020. And if you are white listening to this, right now, ask yourself what it is you are doing to make this world a better, safer place for black people, for native peoples, for brown people. What are you doing to be an anti-racist? Thank you for listening to this episode of The Politicrat. I'm Omar Moore.